The purpose of this presentation, created by Aaron, Reed, Heather, Corianne, myself, Akinese, and Jim, is to explain a lesson intended for students taking modern history of Hawaii. This lesson will cover the history of the Hawaii sugarcane industry while analyzing key events through the lens of economics. The lesson will begin with the teacher and students unpacking the learning goals and objectives. In particular, the teacher will pose the essential question as how can understanding principles of economics explain the impact of historical events relative to the sugar industry in Hawaii? In this lesson, students will understand that the sugar industry in Hawaii grew due to historical events that impacted the supply and demand of sugar. Students will also know how key historical events shifted the supply and demand curves. As a bell ringer or anticipatory set, the teacher will invite students to participate in a think, write, pair, share, answering the following prompt. What do you know about supply and demand of sugar relative to the Hawaii sugar industry? Students will be given a few minutes to think about the response and record it on a post-it. During this time, the teacher will navigate the classroom to gauge students' understanding, and then students will be prompted to pair up with an elbow partner and share their response. When done, the teacher will ask for a few students to share with the entire class. Then this will lead right into the KWL chart, where students will begin to record what they know about these concepts and what they wonder. So these are the terms that will be covered. And these are the two columns that they must complete during this time. Next, the teacher will show a brief video explaining supply and demand, and students will record into their guided notes or KWL chart the definition for each of the terms essential to this lesson.
Let's assume.
So that would include demand and supply, as well as demand curve. And here, this is where the teacher will explain the principle of demand curve relative to the graph included. And then the teacher will move on to explaining the supply curve in relation to the illustration also provided here. Then the teacher will describe the curve shifts and when they would occur, as well as their impact with demand and supply. Next, the teacher will mention a few life examples. That includes a kendama and then the Stanley Cups. The teacher will provide these examples and then prompt students to do a turn and talk of the key terms and their relation to the supply and demand of these products. Here is where the teacher will inform students to shift gears from talking about or learning about the different concepts previously introduced, and that they are now going to apply their knowledge of these concepts to historical events that impacted the demand and supply of sugar and the Hawaiian sugarcane industry. So at this time, students will then refer and complete their guided notes to identify the significance of each event and their impact in relation to the sugar industry in Hawaii, beginning with the first commercially successful sugar plantation on the island of Kauai. Again, the teacher will discuss with the class the impact that this event had on the local sugar market in terms of a curve shift, and then also discuss the supply curve shift to the right. Next, the teacher will go over the Great Mahele, as well as the California Gold Rush, emphasizing with the Great Mahele, the land that is more accessible to non-Hawaiians. And then, of course, with the California Gold Rush, the increased demand due to increasing population on the West Coast. Next, the teacher will go over the American Civil War and its impact on the sugar market in terms of a curve shift. And then also the global impact in terms of a curve shift. Or supply curve shift. Then the teacher will go over the reciprocity treaty relative to the graph here provided, discussing this essential question here. Of course, the teacher would emphasize how the treaty turns Hawaii into a leading sugar producer in the world market, and that by 1890, sugar production increases by 722%. Next, a discussion of the Bayonet Constitution that occurred in 1887 will be discussed, along with the death of King Kalakaua overseas in 1891 and its impact on the industry. And then the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii, followed by the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1902. Teacher and students will also discuss the 1930s, the creation of labor unions where workers fight back for better working conditions and compensation. And then, of course, the impact of the economy booming post-war and how that's impacted the market in terms of a curve shift in the 1950s. And then finally, the reduction of tariffs on international sugar imports to the U.S. that occurred during the 1980s. Next, students will then work in groups to develop a timeline that includes all of the significant events covered during this lecture or this lesson. And they will have to include all of the events here or significant events included in this lesson. And then finally, students will be revisiting their KWL chart to fill out the last column here of what they've learned. And then to bring closure to the lesson, students will complete a short, written response, constructed response on explaining how one of the historical events impacted the supply and demand of sugar in the Hawaii sugarcane industry, as well as describe how key historical events shifted the supply and demand curve. Okay, and that is the conclusion of our lesson. Thank you.